When I first read this text, and I came across that phrase that Jesus said to his disciples, let's go to all the rest of the villages and the towns and so on, so that I can preach there. And he says, that's why I've come. I've come because I need to preach. As a young pastor in Western Pennsylvania, I remember having a conversation with my bishop. He wasn't called a bishop then, he was called a president. He was the president of the New York Conference of the Augustana Lutheran Church. The New York Conference is sort of a misleading title because it not only covered New York, but it covered New Jersey, and it covered Pennsylvania and Virginia, and it covered some parts of Ohio, and it went as far south as Florida. So it was a large territory. At any rate, his name was Thorsten Gustafson. He was a wonderful man, and he told me this story, an incident from his life. His first parish was in New York City, and he was not married, and so he didn't have a wife to do his laundry. So he would take his shirts and whatever else he needed laundered to a local Chinese laundry. And he would go there on a regular basis, weekly, and it was a family laundry. And so there was a mother and a father and all kinds of little kids running around. At any rate, one day he came to the laundry to pick up his shirts and to deliver other shirts to be laundered. And there was this little Chinese boy sitting on the counter. Now, Thorsten always wore a clerical collar, and so he showed up wearing his clerics. And this little Chinese boy looked up at him while he was doing his thing about paying for shirts and so on, and he said, "Are you a sermon?" And Thorsten used to tell that story, and I've told that story, and I've never forgotten it because I think that's a pretty good question. Ruth, are you a sermon?
Yeah.
You are, good. I would say you are.
Thank you.
All right. I'm also reminded of a story that's told about St. Francis of Assisi. One day up in the monastery, he took one of the young novices and he said, "We're going down into the village and we're going to preach." Well, they went down in the village and they walked around, talked to people, and they asked them how they were doing. Harold, how are you doing?
All right.
Okay, good. And at the end of the day, they started back to the monastery. And this novice said to Francis, well, when are we going to start preaching? And Francis said, "We've been preaching all day. Maybe we didn't use words, but people saw us. They saw who we were and how we acted and how we reacted, and that was our sermon. You only preach with words when it's absolutely necessary. The rest of the time, you preach with the way you act and react with people." So, Brian, are you a sermon? Yes. Are you a good sermon? Don't answer that. My question for us today is, obviously, are you a sermon? Because people see us and they hear us, they see how we act and how we react, how we treat other people, and what do they see? If you recall, in the early church, the people around the early Christians always said, "Can you see how those Christians love one another?" And that is the key to preaching in your life. That's what Jesus said. Love one another as I have loved you. As I have loved you. As I have been an example for you. What you have seen in me, is the way you need to live and act and react. And so I say to you today, when you leave here, well, you can watch the game, but when you leave here, be a sermon, and be a good sermon. Amen.